Today's game features a detective, a pilot, a ninja, and an explorer, which might sound like the setup to a bad joke, but it's actually paying homage to the classic games and graphics of the 70s. My name is Graeldon, and I'm reviewing Steam games in alphabetical order to find the hidden gems among the piles of garbage, and today's game is 1-Bit Revival, The Residuals of Null. Let's begin. The 1970s is an important decade for video game history, as it was during this period that we saw the first games to see mainstream popularity begin to emerge, the rise of video game arcades, and even gaming on personal computers, for those of us rich enough or lucky enough to afford them. No, seriously, an Apple II PC, which was released in 1977, was sold for roughly $1,300, which sounds reasonable, until you adjust that price for inflation, which is almost $6,000 today. If you were one of the people with a computer in this decade, you would have access to the latest and greatest games such as Space Invaders, Pong, Asteroids, and Breakout. These are all titles that shaped the early years of gaming and hold a special type of nostalgia for many people that experienced them growing up, which, according to YouTube's data, isn't many of you young whippersnappers watching this video. Regardless, it's no surprise that many people want to relive those memories, and as a result, we will always see new games inspired by much older titles, bringing us to today's game, 1-Bit Revival, The Residuals of Null, which has a title that almost sounds like some kind of newly released crowdfunded 100+ hour JRPG if you simply replaced 1-Bit with a generic anime protagonist name like Sakura. Anyway, let's dive into this game to see what it's all about, and you can only imagine how happy I was to be greeted by an appropriately themed main menu. They've nailed the retro style and added some more modern touches with the scrolling background, which looks to me like a black and white version of some typical synthwave style backgrounds. There seems to be some display issues with Steam though, as the overlay pop-up fails to disappear from the screen correctly. The options menu is appropriately sparse with sliders for sound and music, rebindable controls, and a full screen toggle. The game does also support gamepads, but for some reason the controller keybinds are not rebindable. Getting into the actual game, it's revealed that this is actually 4 games in one. There are 4 characters to choose from, each of which represents a different game, and each has a short animated cutscene to provide some context to the game, but none of these characters are named, so they'll now be Larry, Barry, Holly, and Harry. Starting with Larry the Detective. This game plays like a cross between Bomberman and Pac-Man. The map is viewed from a top-down perspective, and you need to navigate the maze and use bombs to destroy the squares that are trying to catch you. All of the graphics are pretty faithful to the retro stylings, but with the use of some coloured effects, it's actually a bit disingenuous to call this a 1-bit title, but it adheres to the overall principle more often than not, depending on the game you're playing. Larry's bombs can also be used to destroy certain walls and open up new paths to escape from enemies. Walls represented by dash lines can be demolished and will sometimes leave behind items, whereas walls shown by a solid line are, well, solid. Items can increase the number of bombs that can be placed at once, increase the explosion range, or provide temporary effects such as a shield or automatic gun with bouncing bullets. Paying homage to Pac-Man, if you collect all of the dots in a wave, you'll be granted an extra life, so trying to explore the entire map before killing all the enemies is an important strategy. In addition to this, the level will also randomize frequently, shifting into new patterns, forming new paths and routes to take. It helps keep you on high alert, but due to the random nature, it can be either a boon or a bust, as sometimes the new layout will cause you to be trapped with an enemy without an escape. Each level is split into 4 waves, represented by the solid and dash square counter at the top of the screen, and this is used throughout all 4 games to show your progress. According to the achievements, there is an end to each of the games, but it's not one that I managed to reach during my time with the game. Not gonna lie, these games are tough, really tough, and some play sessions can last up to an hour or more due to them being wave-based in most cases. As the waves progress, new enemy types appear, and praise needs to be given to the devs here for creating an interesting and engaging suite of enemies to harass Larry and force you to change tactics. Some move faster and will chase the player on sight, some fire projectiles, some need to be hit multiple times, some will run away from bombs, and some can even teleport to other parts of the map, making them incredibly unpredictable. The way the minimalistic graphics have been used here to create different designs of squares for each of the enemies is quite clever, and I appreciate that the game gives the player space to encounter each of these new enemies, observe how they behave, and then determine the best tactics to deal with them. There are no tutorials or guides here. Overall, it's a fun and challenging little game, and that's actually the trend for all the minigames in this compilation. With the exception of the next one anyway, at least in my personal opinion. Game 2 features Barry the pilot in an asteroid-style game. Like with the detective game, additional mechanics have been implemented with the various enemy types and available power-ups, but I think the controls and general movement need more polish. I never felt truly in control, even after a few rounds, as I was constantly fighting with the ship to move where I wanted, as the game uses tank-style controls where you're able to move forwards, backwards, or turn. Compared to the freedom of movement I'm used to with similar games like #Funtime, this resulted in what should have been a fun game becoming an exercise in frustration. Moving swiftly along to a slightly better game with the explorer Holly. Looking at the art, Holly doesn't seem dressed as what I would describe as an explorer, but that's the label the devs have used in the Steam store, so that's the one we're going with. This game is a bit trickier to describe as it's a combination of dominoes and something else that I can't quite pinpoint. Once again, we're in a top-down perspective as a circle, and both enemies and blocks with symbols will gradually enter from around the edge of the play area. Blocks can be picked up and used to kill weaker enemies or trap tougher ones. Enemies trapped in blocks can then be matched with other blocks with the same symbol, and if 4 or more are matched, they will all be destroyed, damaging any enemies inside. This leads to an interesting sense of chaos as you attempt to wrangle both your ever-shrinking play area as well as the abilities of the different enemy variants. Other than that, there's not too much else to be said about this one that we haven't touched on already, so let's move on to the final game, the Ninja Harry. Unlike the previous games, the Ninja is a 2D platforming action game. Once again, it's all about surviving as many waves as possible and using your skills to manage the onslaught of enemy squares that the game will send your way. Harry is equipped with a sword and is able to wall jump, which is handy considering that the room is constantly creating new platforms and walls, and will also rotate at random intervals. As with the detective game, this can cause Harry to become trapped with enemies and lead to a quick death, but thankfully any wall or floor can be destroyed with a few hits. Breaking walls will reveal items like health or extra lives, or power-ups that allow Harry to send energy waves from their sword, which are used to break through the shield of strong enemies. In an interesting twist, enemies actually need to be hit twice in a row to deal damage. The first hit simply stuns them for a couple of seconds, and the second hit actually deals damage to them. As with the detective game, the enemies get stronger as you progress, and I like that you can see similar designs, attacks, and behaviours that are consistent between the different games. It does a lot to make the 4 games feel connected, like they all come from the same world, even though the games are standalone titles. The biggest issue here is that each of the 4 games are also fairly simple, leading to the question, is there enough substance and replayability here to make this game worth your time? Thankfully, the answer is yes, although that does depend heavily on your personal preferences. If you enjoy games that offer a challenge as well as a range of long-term achievements to work towards, then if you're on board with the simple graphics, this might be a good game for you. Coming at $4.65 Canadian, it feels like there is a reasonable amount of content on offer here for the asking price, even if I really only gelled with half of the games. Each individual game is pretty well balanced, leaning heavily towards rewarding skillful players by drip-feeding new mechanics and unlocking achievements that require tasks to be completed thousands of times. I managed to unlock a few of these, and my personal criteria for finishing the game was to achieve a high score on any of the 4 games, which I managed to do on the Ninja game. If you decide to give this one a go, let me know if you managed to beat my score. From an artistic standpoint, the devs have made great use of the limited graphics available to them, even going so far as to create a visual identity that is consistent between the different games, along with a great retro soundtrack and punchy sound effects for things like explosions. The music can get a bit repetitive as each track is only a couple of minutes long, but you can actually press a button to change the music to a different track in the middle of a game. The issue is that if these kinds of retro arcade style games that focus on score chasing don't take your fancy, you're going to struggle to have more than a few minutes of fun here, which makes games like these tricky to score because it's a relatively niche genre. So when it comes to my ratings, please be mindful that I'm trying to account for the target audience in question. It's not a broad spectrum recommendation. And that's why my final rating for 1-Bit Revival, the Residuals of Null, is the Apple II computer, out of 10. It has an important place in gaming history, but that doesn't mean that the average person would still want it today. Thanks for watching. Welcome to the end of the video. In today's episode, Larry was sponsored by Lampyrides, Barry was sponsored by Neggy Malevolent, Holly was sponsored by Theo the Cat Guy, and Harry was sponsored by Zest. I'd also like to say a special thank you to our two Knights of the Holy Grail, Freaky Feline and Loveheart Gonzi. Lastly, I want to thank you for joining me on this weird gaming adventure through the depths of Steam, and if you've made it this far, here's a sneak peek of the next game. Until next time, take care. I think Panda just meowed during that last line, so I'm going to do it again.